mandala. Hello again, everyone. Nuri here with HCA. I am HCA's art director and program instructor in the Antelope Valley. I teach art at a few communities in Lancaster and Palmdale here in Southern California. We usually have a lot of fun in class drawing, painting, and doing all sorts of other art-related activities. But since quarantine, I've been doing these weekly videos to try and help keep folks entertained and continue learning. So this week we are going to be designing our very own mandalas. This is going to be an intermediate tutorial. It is intermediate because while there's no inherently difficult parts, in fact we're mostly just going to be making lines, there is some measuring and planning that may prove a little bit difficult for younger viewers or participants. For those of you who don't know, a mandala is a geometric configuration of shapes that usually is in a circular form. In fact, the word mandala actually comes from the Sanskrit word for circle. Mandalas have a number of complex uses carrying different spiritual and religious meanings, and mapping one can actually be used as an inspirational and therapeutic practice. Personally and artistically speaking, I love this as a project because it's a way that we can practice line making, and also while working on something that is personal and individualized. So feel free to fill your mandala up with any shapes, objects, or forms that resonate with you or have special meaning to you. Mandalas often represent the connection between our inner world and outer reality, so you can draw freely and let the shapes form, or consciously insert iconography that is personal to you. Or don't. Just draw what I draw and have a good time doing it. Either way, it's a cool project. I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. What I love about this project is that it doesn't take a lot of materials to complete. So let's review what we are going to need to get this done. First off, a piece of paper. This is just regular old computer paper, which serves fine for the purposes of ink and pencil. But let's say you want to paint your mandala with watercolor or acrylic, then you might want to upgrade to a watercolor paper, a mixed media paper, or even a canvas if you're comfortable sketching on one of those. Next thing, a pencil. Once again, any old pencil will do. I'm using a HB number 2 pencil and an eraser. That is going to be key, as there are going to be a few guidelines and just lines in general that you may want to erase. Next up, a ruler. Something with measurements is preferable. If you don't have access to a ruler, or you don't have one where you are, just go ahead and use a straight edge. Like I did mention, measurements are going to be a thing for this project. However, it's not the end of the world if you just end up eyeballing a lot of it. This is going to be far from perfect. As you can see, I've got a mandala that I've already completed here. This was completed with pencil. After the pencil drawing was finished, I went ahead and outlined all of my lines with a black fine point Sharpie. An alternative to a Sharpie would be any brand of just pigment liner. These are pens specifically made for outlining or going over lines. And lastly, your choice if you want to color your mandala or not, but if you choose to do so, you can with Sharpies is what I used, but colored pencils, crayons, paint, anything that you're comfortable with, you can go ahead and fill those lines. And as I mentioned before, this is a completed mandala that I finished beforehand. I just chose a few colors. You don't need to go crazy, but you know what? If you want to go crazy, pick all the colors of the rainbow, or just choose 3 or 4 like I did here. Most of these designs are going to have repeating and alternating motifs and patterns, so you can get away with just using a minimal amount of colors. This is, hopefully you can see it okay, another mandala design that I did. This is nautically themed. I did some whales, I did some wave patterns, and let's see if I can get it a little bit closer so you can see. Once again, you can see a lot of these lines aren't perfect. I, for the most part, freehanded this thing after I got a lot of the guides in place. So you can see that the possibilities are really endless to add in whatever details that you want to throw into your design. With that said, we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first step, what we're going to do here is create a square. So most computer papers or standard pieces of paper are 8.5 by 11. So however big or small you make your square is up to you. I am going to make mine kind of as big as I can go in one direction at 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So I'm going to just go ahead and do an 8-inch line kind of right here. I want my image to be somewhat centered. If it's not, it's once again not the end of the world. You can always cut your paper, your mandala design out after you have completed it. That is a far away from being centered. So let's try that again. I do, as in most of my videos, stress the importance of pressing lightly so you can erase cleanly. However, I will probably be pressing a bit darker than I normally would on this video, so it's easier for you to see, because I realize pencil on camera doesn't always show up the best. 8-inch line right there. You could measure this out so it's exactly perfect. I'm just eyeballing the space between the ruler and the edge of the paper here, and as long as it looks generally parallel throughout, meaning no slants like that, it looks to be a little over about a 1/2 inch going all the way up. So I'm just going to go ahead and do another 8-inch line. Let's make sure this is as steady as we can make it. 8-inch line going up that way. And we're just going to do this all the way across so that we have a box that will be you know, somewhat symmetrical and even at the end of it all. And lastly, we'll just connect this little guy. Cool. We got a box. That's the first step to making this mandala. Does look okay. Next up, we are going to be putting a center point in the middle of our design. So the middle of 8 inches, which was my box, it will be different if you chose something smaller or larger, but the middle of 8 inches or halfway point is going to be 4 inches. So I'm just going to go around to each of these lines that I did on my square and mark where 4 inches would be. Once those lines are in place, I can go ahead and connect those. And these are also, in addition to providing our center point, they're going to give us some handy guidelines when we are drawing our mandala. Okay. And another thing I stress is that this is going to not be perfect, so don't feel that it has to be. However, if you were bad at measuring like I am and you put a mark in the wrong place, you can go ahead and double check and just erase those lines and make sure that it is to your liking when you get that center point in there. Or if it looks off, if one of the edges of your square looks slanted, go ahead and take the opportunity to fix it like I'm doing. And not that it's really going to matter that much in the end, but if it makes you feel better during the process, go for it. All right. We are now going to add a center point right in the middle there. So humble beginnings for this design, but it is going to evolve relatively quickly. From this center point, next thing we're going to add another series of dots. So the idea is that we are going to work our way from the inside out. And now I'm going to choose a measurement, which for my purposes is going to be a 1/2 inch coming out from the center dot in all directions on these guidelines that we made. So it doesn't have to be a 1/2 inch. If you prefer it to be 1 inch, 2 inches, that works as well. But the important thing is that it's equidistant at all points. You want to make sure that all of these dots are spaced evenly. In this case, once again, a 1/2 inch apart. Next, we are going to be doing the same thing, but spacing out even more. So for this next dot, I want it to be 1.5 inches from the center dot. So I'm going to go ahead and measure 1.5 inches or 1 inch away from your other dot. Once again, it can be whatever you like it to be. It doesn't have to be 1.5 inches. It could be 2 inches away. You could go smaller and even do, another 1/2 inch or smaller measurement. But the important part is that they are all the same distance. That's going to be a general theme throughout our mandala, is the idea that what you add on one side, we are going to add on all other sides, if applicable. That will make more sense as we go on. Lastly, I'm going to do one more line coming away from here. This one 1.5 inches away from my previous dot. So in total, these dots span 3 inches coming away from our center point, which would give it 6.6 inches all the way up and down, left and right. Okay, great. Grid is complete. The next step here is to draw a diagonal guideline going from one corner to another and through your center point, if that lines up. Like mine doesn't exactly line up. Once again, not the end of the world, but we're going to do our best to try and get it through the center. This one, this side, seems to line up just a teensy bit better, which is fortunate. Okay. Now, we are going to do another series of dots on these 4 diagonal lines, which are roughly at a 45-degree angle. If you can't get that measurement, don't worry about it. But coming from the center point, we want to space these dots out at the same spacing where we measured our other dots. So once again, a 1/2 inch, then 1.5 inches away from the center, and then 1.5 inches away from the last dot. If you haven't picked up by now, which there's no expectation that you would, we are creating a guide so that we can make some pretty easy circles without the aid of a compass, which is something that I don't readily have laying around. Maybe if you were in school or took some classes recently, and that's something that you might have, but I don't have that. So these dots are going to serve as guiding points and as an aid in drawing circles. So once again, just going around here and adding dots on this diagonal line at the same intervals. A 1/2 inch, 1.5 inches away from the center dot, and ultimately 1.5 inches away from my middle dot there. Now we can start to go in and turn this into more of a mandala by adding some circular shapes. So there are a few tricks to do this. The first is what I've mentioned already. If you have a compass lying around, and stick it right in the middle and make some pretty darn neat circles. Like I mentioned, I don't have that. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just draw a circle connecting these dots. Now, if your measurements are off, like this little circle right here, or this little dot, your circle may be a little bit off. In fact, it's probably going to be a little bit off. And as you can see, it's not going to be perfect. This is not a foolproof plan, but it is a good way so that you don't come up with something that's incredibly lopsided. If it's easier for you, you can go dot to dot like I'm doing right now. I find it a little bit easier to go in a continuous motion and just use these little dots kind of as a relay point. And then you can go ahead and adjust your circle any way you want to after you get that in there. For once again, if some of those dots seem like they're just a millimeter or two away from where they should be, you can go ahead and fix those. But as I mentioned before, this thing doesn't need to be perfect. We're going to be doing a lot of designs and details inside, so a lot of these imperfections are going to be hidden in the end. It's looking a little bit better. Last way to kind of do circles is to literally find something to trace. So you could find a quarter or a coin, let's say, that is roughly the shape of this center circle. Maybe a cup or something along those lines, a can to do the middle circle. And then for our last circle out here, I don't know, maybe a dish, a small plates, smallish plates, a saucer, something like that. Not the world's best circle, but it will do. You can see if any of these lines aren't really doing it for you, just go ahead and erase them. It's okay. This side's proven a little bit tricky, and you can see I just kind of rotated my paper. Don't be afraid to do that either. I try and keep this as stationary as possible while doing these tutorials, just because it's easier to see, and so you stay a little bit more orientated. But if it helps you to rotate, if your hand can move at a better angle in a different direction, use whatever tools you can to make yourself comfortable. That's a good lesson to remember when it comes to art and I guess life in general. Some of these are a little wavy. Once again, I'm used to doing lighter lines I can go over, but hopefully you can see these. Okay. Once again, not a perfect circle, but that is okay. It doesn't need to be perfect. We have the guidelines in. Looks kind of like a little radar screen, but now we can start adding in the fun stuff. Okay. Before we get started on adding in a lot of our details, I want to take the time and clean up a few of these guidelines. I don't need to erase everything right now. In fact, I don't want to, because I want to make sure I have some of these inner lines to serve as guide marks. But if I'm starting in the middle, then I want to kind of have an empty circle to work with. And I can still see some of the lines that I didn't fully erase, so I can use those as guidelines. Now, the thing about mandalas, just like we did with the dots, is everything you add on one side, you're going to want to add on the other side. So I'm just going to start with a simple leaf-like shape. This is one arch, and then a bottom arch, another arch, and a bottom arch. Come up with something that kind of looks clover-shaped, floral-shaped. Doesn't really need to represent anything particularly. However, if this is a mandala that you want to infuse with personal iconography or symbols, then feel free to make whatever happens in the center something that is personalized to you. I next am going to add just a little arch in between each one of these, give it a little bit more of some more detail in there. If you want to, you can throw in some lines. How much you do is entirely up to you. If you're going to end up coloring this afterwards, keep in mind that you'll have a lot more to do, but that's not a bad thing. Okay, so we have the center point finished. That's good. Now we're just going to continue to work our way outward. Here, I'm going to draw kind of like a bulb dome shape, almost like an oval with the bottom part, or an egg with the bottom part cut off as it meets the bottom. And then I'm going to have it come to a point. I'm going to do that on all sides and do your best to make them as similar as possible. If your lines are a little bit off, once again, like mine are, that's okay. As long as the shapes generally look the same and are roughly the same size, it shouldn't matter too much in the end. Great. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and erase some of these lines in the middle. If these lines are something that you perhaps want to keep to add more symmetry, that's fine too. But I want these to look almost like little petals, floral petals. So I'm going to erase the lines between the little points I put on the end of each of them and the round part of the shape. There we have it. If you'd like, you can go in and if you're sure that this is a shape or an object that you like, you can go ahead and add some more definition, darken the lines. I might do that so it's easier to see. You might want to resist the urge to do too much intricate shading and detailing at this point, because in case anything does need to change, it'll be harder to change it. But feel free to do so if you're pretty confident that this is what you want it to look like. A little bit of depth and shading here, just making the lines darker around certain edges, will kind of give it more of a dimensional effect and maybe look like certain parts are popping out a little bit more than others. We might explore that a little bit more as we continue. I don't want to get sucked into that right now because, yeah, I could get lost in that for a while. Okay, kind of going with a basic floral, I guess you could call it that, if it's even that, but it's just a shape motif. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a little shape in between each of these petals I just did. This is going to be almost like a little pointed curve. It's kind of what we just did, except it's a little bit flatter to kind of fill in some of the space. And if you haven't seen it yet, basically I'm starting with a curve. I droop down a little bit before I go up to a point. That's maybe 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the second circle. And there we have it. Now, there are some things I'd like to fix here. For example, this circle doesn't exactly match the rest of it. Like this shape that I just drew is much higher, so I'm going to probably adjust that a little bit. You can rotate your paper and kind of check your work along the way and see if there's anything you'd like to fix. Doesn't have to happen, but the more symmetrical this looks, the more mandala-like it will be. And also do your best to try and make these lines clean and crisp. You don't want too much going on. It'll just make it easier when it comes to inking it. Okay, got a few shapes in there. Now what I want to do is break it up and add some detail. So along the outer edge of this circle where everything's contained, I'm going to go ahead and add a circle at every point where these guidelines intersect. This circle is going to act kind of as a border. And in between these circles, I'm going to add slightly smaller circles, following the curve and leading into the other circles around this shape. This is a great way to add detail quickly, give some more intricacy to the design, and kind of break up some of the larger shapes that we've already drawn. Pardon my hand there. As a lefty, it can be difficult sometimes. Great. So we've got a nice looking center mandala. What I'm going to do now is just add a little bit of detail inside some of these petals. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a curlicue flourish in the middle here. And I'm not sure, maybe another line in between here. Another cool thing about this project is you could go on forever. I mean, you could add details upon details upon details. Maybe we'll throw some dots in here. And this can take on many forms. Once you get the hang of it too, the whole measuring and setup for this project, you could probably crank out a lot of them. And you know what? Maybe let's do some line work. So kind of following a little bit of our guidelines, these diagonals coming through here, I'm just going to add some lines. Got a lot of curvy organic shapes, so I want some more linear aspects to this. So I'm just going to throw in some lines here. Okay. Now, if you're concerned about blank areas, you shouldn't be. There's nothing saying that these designs have to be jam-packed with stuff. If you're trying to fill it with particular imagery, perhaps. But if you do go on to coloring, that these are great. These open spaces are great opportunities to just fill with blended colors, gradients, or just solid fill-in. Fantastic. All right, now we're going to move on to our outer edge. What I'm going to do is on the 4 major points, meaning up, down, right, and left, I'm going to add a teardrop, raindrop shape on each of those points. I'm extending this all the way to the edge of our square. I'm not going to do it on the diagonals because that would be a little bit of a larger raindrop shape, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just don't want it for my particular design. But if that's something you want to experiment with, feel free. I'm going to go ahead and clean up inside of these. Might clean up the outside of these as well. To make this a little bit more complex, I'm going to do another raindrop inside of it. Give those guys a little bit of a border. And now I'm going to do some curly lines, almost like little archways throughout the borders of these. So imagine like you were doing the circles that we did around this border, but I'm just doing a bunch of arches. Okay, so looking good. Clean off some of this eraser dust. Now we're going to continue adding in more shapes to fill in. I'm going to do on my diagonal lines, I've decided to do another raindrop shape, but this one facing the opposite direction as the previous 4. why not? We'll go ahead and add an inside line as well. Once those guys are in there, we can go ahead and fix them up if we need to. Erase any guidelines that you don't want. And so far, so good. Minus any imperfections in drawing, we have a pretty symmetrical design here. I'm going to go ahead and put a circle in the middle of these. These are just random shapes that I am coming up with. Circles and teardrops and basically things to fill in what we're doing. Okay, now we're going to start filling in some of these other spots in between our teardrops here. For these, I'm thinking maybe just doing a series of skinny leaf-like shapes. Doing my best here to try and make them the same width throughout. If you want to go with something a little bit larger or a little bit rounder, you can do that too. Does not have to be, you don't have to follow exactly what I'm doing, but if you decide to do that, that's perfectly acceptable. You can see I'm just doing one motion up and then one motion down. I'm kind of imagining a little point at the end here and then bringing it down. Sometimes I talk a little bit about rhythm and momentum. If you can, whether you're shading or doing repeated lines like these, sometimes you can find yourself just getting into a sort of repeated motion or rhythm for these lines, and it makes it a little bit easier. Wow, okay, that went a little bit quicker than I thought it would. So I am liking the way this is looking. Looks like a pretty nice mandala. I'm thinking there's a lot of detail in here, but we're not really adding too much detail. So in order to throw some in there, I'm going to draw in every other one of these shapes. I'm going to draw kind of like a small little pointed almond or eye-like shape, just to kind of give them some more detail. Maybe I'll take that a step further, draw a line coming from the top and the bottom of these shapes that we just drew. Once again, I am just making this up as I go along. I wouldn't be too concerned about certain spaces, once again, not having anything inside of them. You can use color to define a lot of this design once it's complete. Looking good. All right, now we're going to give a little bit of love to the outside of the circle. Just like we did for this more inner circle, I'm going to add circles at each of my diagonal points. And then between these and these raindrops, I'm going to once again add another circle border. It's a nice way to tie in what we did before, just doing these quick, loose, and fast circles all the way around. I feel like those circles kind of tie in what we were doing before, so I like that. One of the last things we're going to do for the middle, or for the outer portion of our mandala design is we are going to add in some flourishes, or I guess more petal shapes, maybe is a better way to describe them, coming out from the outside. What I'm not crazy about with this design so far is that I do have these 4 points sticking out, so it kind of looks like a compass rose, something directional, which isn't exactly what I'm going for. So in order to change that, I'm going to start at the point of one of these, the 4 main teardrop shapes. I'm going to once again draw a petal shape, which arches up, and then as it comes towards the middle, loops down a little bit before it comes back up. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. This might be a little bit tricky to get symmetrical, but a little bit of practice and just following your lines from one point to another should help. Just try and make each line as a continuous gesture if you can. I can tell that this is already helping make this look a little bit more floral. Okay, looking good. Now we can go ahead and add in some more details here. I might just do a few circles on the larger points. These will be some cool little details to fill in later. There we go. And once again, like I mentioned before, you could go on and on with this and just keep adding on. Obviously, you could go to the edge of the paper if you wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but I am just going to add a few more embellishments to some parts of this design, like adding in kind of like a little edge or border here to these petal shapes that I just drew. Now is a great opportunity to go in and just fix up anything that you feel like maybe it's bugging you or you want to tidy up. I am going to take the opportunity to maybe add in some definition to some more of these areas. I don't want to worry about it too much because I am going to ink this, go over it with marker shortly. And so a lot of this is just going to be covered up and I could probably do with marker, but I want to make sure that I'm defining. If I'm not sure about that, I want to be sure and go over what I'm thinking that I might want to define later on. Okay, very nice. So speaking of defining, I am going to go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to take my fine point Sharpie and just starting from the middle, I'm just going to go over these lines. My experience with Sharpies, if you're using a brand new one, the point will be pretty small, but after a few uses, it will get a little bit wider as it kind of wears down a little bit. So just be cognizant of that as it happens, but this is a nice way to define a lot of the line work if you're sure that that's what you want it to look like. You can also add in some shading at certain points to once again give this more depth. Now we have our design all inked out. If you were watching that, although it was probably sped up, you see that I was going around and just doing my best to go over what I had drawn in pencil. Now, if your ink line deviates from your pencil line, that's okay. you just want to do what I'm doing now, go ahead and erase and clean up a lot of the extra lines that we have there, so that when you go into color, if you decide to do so, it's a little bit cleaner looking. Not as much going on. Now, for coloring purposes, as I mentioned before, you can use whatever medium you prefer to use. I'm going to be using just a permanent marker to color this in, so it's so it shows up nice and bold on the camera. But once again, colored pencils, crayons, anything that you have at your disposal will work just fine. This also is essentially now a coloring page, a page out of a coloring book. And so if this is something that you absolutely fall in love with, you might want to maybe take a photo of it or make some photocopies if you have that capability at the moment, because you could print off a few of these and just keep them around and at different points, just color them in different color motifs. Okay, all right, got most of that erased. Not gonna worry about every little thing. And there we have it. A quick little speed run through the coloring of this particular mandala design. Not perfect, but once again, it doesn't have to be. This is such a fun project to just get lost in. You can take all the time you want developing the design and then inking the design to whatever level of detail you want, and then just fill it in with color. You could crank a few of these out and make your own mandala coloring book, each with its own little theme, or injected with a bunch of symbols or cool things that you like to do. So there we have it. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you are not already, please do like and subscribe HCA Programs channel to check out more content like this. I will see you next week, and as always, stay safe and healthy, folks.